Hello and welcome back to the Chargers Check-In. My name is Cecilia and we have some breaking news. The Chargers have traded for Ravens linebacker Odafe Oweh. So first of all, the details of what this trade looks like. The Chargers get Odafe Oweh and a 2027 7th round pick. Now, it may not be 2027. The report just said a future 7th round pick, but I'm going to go ahead and assume 2027. The Ravens receive Chargers safety Alohi Gilman and a 5th round pick. So that's a next year 5th round pick. There's a lot to get into, but if you're a Chargers fan, the player involved that you'll know more about is Alohi Gilman. Now, losing Alohi Gilman, it's kind of bittersweet. I mean, for me, this is a player who had a really high ceiling, but also had a really low floor. You know, he would make these huge splash plays, and then he would kind of miss basic tackles. He'd be out of place in coverage. He wouldn't be on the same page as the rest of the Chargers secondary. And, you know, at the same time, this was a late round pick. The Chargers got good value for him. But when they paid him in 2023, they paid him like a starter. And he is more of a rotational piece now, so it to me, it kind of makes sense to trade him away. It's just sad because he's definitely been involved in some huge plays over the last few years, so it's sad to see him go. I think Jesse Minter wants something more reliable. The Chargers, like I talked about in my last video, are having a hard time tackling, having a hard time, setting the edge and containing players, and I don't think they're going to want to pay for players who aren't able to get that kind of thing done. So I'm not super surprised by this. The only reason I'm surprised is because Jim Harbaugh very recently has spoken highly of Alohi Gilman, but that's how fast things move, especially when Chef Ortiz is your general manager. That's how these things go. So now the Chargers safety room looks like Derwin James, Elijah Molden, and Tony Jefferson. And Alohi Gilman just couldn't really compete once Tony Jefferson got his chance because Elijah Molden was hurt, and now it's going to be in Molden we trust, and that's how it's going to be. And, I think that makes sense. Elijah Molden has shown that he can do really well. He hasn't done much this season, but to be fair to him, he's mostly been hurt. And I'm also looking to RJ Mickens. He was the, I believe, 6th round pick this year. Clearly, they feel like he's a developmental piece that they can work on long term. I think he becomes more important now. Otherwise, safety becomes kind of a depth need for future drafts, and they do not have many draft picks next year. They are going to need everyone that they can get because now they have exactly one pick in every round except the 5th round and the 7th round. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. But as far as Odafe Oweh goes, now Oweh coming from Baltimore, he was a former 1st round pick out of Penn State in 2021. He was a traits guy. He's 6'5", 265 pounds. He was never considered a super polished player, but the Ravens had the 31st overall pick that they had gotten in a trade, so it was kind of like, why not take a flyer on a traits guy? He's not going to be the guy right away. Maybe after a few years he can be. And he was pretty quiet up until 2024, and then he got 11 sacks in a season, and that's a heck of a season from a young guy, and he seemed to be on the way up, but this season he got off to a slow start. He hasn't had any sacks yet. He has had 5 quarterback hits. It's one of those things that if you're just looking at the stats, you're not going to see, but he still is definitely making an impact. He can be a little hit or miss against the run, which is concerning, but at the same time, I look at the Chargers defensive line and I go, you know what, all these guys are pretty good against the run. We need someone who's willing to pin their ears back and go after the passer, someone who can play across from Thule, and the good news is, this is a guy who, sometimes he plays on the left, sometimes he plays on the right. He seems reasonably comfortable going from the interior sometimes. I think something Jesse Minter values a lot is that versatility. Jesse Minter wants these players to be so versatile that he's willing to drop an interior guy into coverage. We've seen Thule drop into coverage, so anything you can do to free up Thule to go after the quarterback is something I'm happy about. I also think it's worth noting he was currently the Ravens' best edge rusher, and so a lot of the time he was getting chipped, he was dealing with, double blocks, and that's going to make it a lot harder for him to perform. Now, if he isn't having a good year, why would we get him? Well, the fact of the matter is the Chargers need to do anything they can to get Bud Dupree off the field. He has been completely quiet, and he wasn't very good last year. They signed him because he was a veteran, he's good against the run, but the run game isn't what's killing them. It's not being able to get after the quarterback. So I think this is a move that makes sense. And, this is a guy known for his pass rush speed, and that's not the case with Tuli. That's not the case with Khalil Mack. These guys are pocket crushers. Same with the interior, with Jamari Caldwell and Tier Tart. If the pocket is going to be crushed, then that gives a faster guy a great opportunity to get at the quarterback because there's not going to be anywhere he can go. So to me, this is a complementary piece. And I was just looking into what are their options for trading at edge, and something that made me think about was it's not just about who is a complement to Tuli, it's about who makes sense when Khalil Mack is back. It's got to be someone good enough that you want them in that rotation, someone that displaces Bud Dupree and allows Khalil Mack to get the rest he needs. He's definitely going to be on a snap count, and you want to keep Khalil Mack healthy and rested because he's an older player and he's so important to this defense, as we've talked about. And to me, the main takeaway, they don't lose draft picks in terms of the number of draft picks. I think people talk about 7th rounders like that's no different than just getting UDFAs, but a lot of the time they can be important for trade value, and I don't think this will be the only trade the Chargers make. I'm going to come out with a video probably later this week on running back options that they can look at. I do think it's very unlikely that they trade for another edge player unless somebody gets hurt, but most likely they are going to trade for a running back. It's possible that they trade for some sort of offensive line depth piece. I talked about in my hot takes video how they need an edge rusher more than they need an offensive lineman because there's just not very good trade value in trading for offensive linemen in the middle of the season. That doesn't mean it's impossible to find something. It just means that most likely the best value going forward is going to be trading for someone who can run the ball or who can get after a passer. Now, I think a lot of people look at trades like, okay, who won the trade? And while that makes sense, we're all competitive in that way. This is a trade I think that makes sense for both teams. On the Ravens side, it frees up $8 million in cap. It allows them to get another safety. Maybe that means they're moving back to their 3-high safety look that they had when their defense was better. It could mean that they're preparing to make a much bigger move in the edge room. That seems to be something that a lot of Ravens fans are talking about. Like maybe they can go get one of those big names that instantly improves the defense. That doesn't strike me as a Ravens move. Anything could happen. Joe Hurties learned from the Ravens that you're usually going to get your best value on the non-splash trades. You can't just depend on the great players. Now, I am seeing a lot of Ravens players saying things like, this guy was supposed to be so great and then he wasn't, and sure, he had one good year, but he was supposed to be so good, and that kind of makes sense because anytime you have a first-round draft pick, you really need them to turn into a solid starter, and he is a starter, but with his traits, he could have been so much more, seems to be the general takeaway. A lot of them are very negative about him. I kind of look at that as Ravens fans needing to take out their disappointment in this season on someone, so why not have it be him? But most of them, you could tell, had never heard of Alohi Gilman before. And I know Alohi Gilman, he's graded relatively high for what he is, at least to me. Like I talked about, he's one of those players that might make the play of the game. But you have to ask, well, why were the Chargers in that situation? Well, it's because he missed 2 tackles earlier in the game. Well, it's because he had a miscommunication and he and Derwin weren't on the same page. And that's the kind of thing that, the Ravens are taking a flyer on him and betting that they can get more out of him. Would I bet that my coach could get more out of a secondary player than Jesse Minter? No, I wouldn't. Would I bet that Jesse Minter could get more out of an edge rusher than the Ravens defense? Yeah, I would. And so while I'm inclined to say that the Chargers won this trade, anything could happen. This is relatively even. A lot of Ravens fans are panicking, saying, oh, this means they're trading the season away. I don't think that's the case. That doesn't seem like something Harbaugh can afford to do. He's kind of in the hot seat, but we will see. So let me know what you guys think of this trade. We're going to go over a little bit more Chargers news, but for me, man, the main takeaway is it gets Bud Dupree off the field. It gives us a chance. We need that. He's only under contract for this year. This was his 5th-year option off of his rookie contract, so if it doesn't work out, that's fine. We don't need to bring him back next year. But if it does work out, that frees up our high draft picks next year for what we need, which is interior offensive linemen. And, looking at next year's draft, there are a lot of good offensive linemen. There's some good centers, but The fact of the matter is a lot of teams need offensive linemen. Every year, especially as the NFL trends back more in favor of the run game, more and more teams are realizing that they need good offensive linemen, and defensive lines have surpassed offensive lines in talent. And part of that is what teams want to invest in, and they're starting to learn. So to me, it's really important that some of those first picks go to the offensive line, and that's not going to be possible if the Chargers didn't make a move on the defensive line. So I don't think it's likely that they make another edge trade, but we will see. Anything could happen. As we all know, injuries seem to be really common on this team, but let me know what you guys think. Now, in other news, the Chargers did sign Nyheim Miller-Hines to the practice squad. He is a running back who looked really good with the Chargers in the offseason, but he didn't end up making the roster when it came down to it, and he didn't end up making the practice squad either. They just had such a stacked running back room, and, they had to cut some players. It was inevitable. No one could have anticipated both of the Chargers' starting running backs going down long term, especially Najee Harris being out the whole season. So we'll see what that can be. Obviously, they still have a couple running backs on the roster with Hassan Haskins and Monty Vidal. They're also trying out Donta Foreman, who he used to play for the Browns and the Bears. He's kind of been on a few different teams. They're trying him out, seeing what that could be. Also, Royce Freeman, who played most recently for the Bears. They're trying him out. Travion Williams, he is a running back. He's also a return specialist, which tells me that they maybe don't see a future in Keandre Lambert-Smith as a returner, and I think that makes sense. He looks so unsure of himself. I think he's going to need at least another year until he's comfortable enough to really play well in this league, despite having a great preseason showing, which is a little disappointing. Like I said, I will likely go over running back options later this week. I think there are a lot of really good trade options for the Chargers, and I think there are a lot of teams with good running backs that are going to be sellers at the deadline. I would be surprised if the Chargers don't make a significant move in the running back room in the next couple weeks. Bittersweet to see Alohi Gilman go. He's been a part of some really awesome defensive performances, but he's also had some really disappointing moments. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think the Chargers are going to win this trade? Do you think it'll end up being a good move for both teams? Do you think the Ravens are kind of having a fire sale? What is your takeaway? But thank you so much for watching. My name is Cecilia. This has been the Chargers Check-In. Please like and subscribe if you like what you've seen, and I will see you all next time.